Well, I've been gone for the last 3 weeks, and I just want to say thank you for those who filled in. I think Paul Slaughter did a great job preaching. He killed it, you know. You got Pastor Chris Pizza Payoni, did tremendous. And Pastor Trevor Millertime did a great job, too. See? But I do have a bone to pick with you, Trevor. I have a bone to pick with you. So when Trevor was speaking on our theme is Zeros of the Bible. He said, if you notice, God kind of designed it. My first sermon was about Jephthah. He's in the Old Testament book of Judges. And then you start moving up, and Paul Slaughter talked about the servant girl and Naaman. That's the book of the Kings. And then we get to the New Testament with Chris Payoni and Zacchaeus during the time of Jesus. And then he went up to Apollos. That's what Trevor preached on last week. It's the era of the apostles. And he said, Chris, we only have one book left, Revelation. So you got to pick a zero from Revelation. And I'm like, what in the world? That's not fair. And there's only one zero in Revelation, and that is the man after 666, the Antichrist. And I can't speak on that, but next week we are. So get ready. What I'm going to speak on is found in the book of Numbers. If you go to the book of Numbers, we're going to look on Caleb. Fourth book of the Bible, Numbers chapter 13, and Caleb is our next zero. And the subtitle is Caleb, a Contemporary Zero. But we're going to begin in Numbers 13. While I was camping 2 weeks ago, and this is the reason we're going to be speaking about Caleb, because I needed it. And I think you will need it. About 2 weeks ago while I was camping, I was sitting by the poolside where we normally go camping, and I slipped into a nostalgic fog. It caused me to tumble down a memory hole when my kids were 2, 4, 5, and 7. Add 20 years to that, and that's where they're at now. I remember taking them to that camp pool to swim all day long. I'd put them in a little red wagon and pull them along, go to the sand dunes and hold their hands while you climb the big sand dunes at Silver Lake. Then put them to bed early while my wife and I would, just crash watching the fire at night. And now my kids are all adults doing adult things. No more little red wagons. They all won't fit into it anymore, And then they're running here and there in their own cars. And so here I am often by myself by the same pool reading old man books, old man literature, wishing for those days back. It's hard to believe 20 years have gone by. It's really astounding. I can't believe it. I look in the mirror now and I see, those claw wrinkles, those crow feet wrinkles. Where did those come from? Then I pull those gray hairs out. My dad used to use Grecian formula to hide them, but it turns your hair orange, so I just try to pluck it. What in the world, where are these gray hair coming from? And I got to lug around this spare tire that I never had before. I'm an old man, no longer doing cannonballs and belly flops with my kids. And then that voice, I could hear it this summer coming in, mocking me, saying, Chris, you're old. You're a has-been. Give it up. Give it up. All you have left, Chris, is sitting on a couch, eating Snyder pretzels and watching Office reruns. That's the rest of your life. So get ready. Let the younger people dream. Go back to bed, old man. That's what I heard. That's what I heard in my ears. Old man. I don't like that idea. Old man. I'm thinking in the Bible, are there any old men that were? Yes, there is one. His name is Caleb. And he's a lot older than I am. And he was still used greatly by God. But I got to be honest with you, I never really studied his story in depth. So by the poolside, I started reading about him. I'm like, wow, I needed this. And I'm telling you, you need this. You really need this. So we're going to begin starting in verse 26 of Numbers 13. It's basically the story of the spies. 12 of them, they're in the wilderness. 12 are sent in to spy on the promised land. God is going to say, I have this land for you. So they sent 12 spies, one from each tribe, to see what it's like. So we're going to jump in verse 26 when they come back to report. They came back to Moses and Aaron and the whole Israelite community at Kadesh in the desert of Paran. There they reported to them and the whole assembly and showed them the fruit of the land. If you go earlier to verse 23, they cut off a cluster of grapes, and 2 men have to carry it on a stick because it's so big. They're so excited about this cluster of grapes. Verse 27, they gave Moses this account. We went into the land to which you sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey. Here is its fruit, but the people who live there are powerful. And the cities are fortified and very large. We even saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites live in the Negev. The Hittites, Jebusites, and Amorites live in the hill country. And the Canaanites live near the sea and along the Jordan. Then Caleb silenced the people before Moses, and he said, we should go up and take possession of land. We can do it. And in the NIV it says we can certainly do it. No problem. Don't worry. But, according to verse 31, the men who had gone up with him said, we can't attack those people. They're stronger than we are. And they spread among the Israelites a bad report about the land that they had explored. They said, the land we explored devours those living in it. All the people we saw there are of great size. We saw the Nephilim there. The descendants of Anak came from Nephilim. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them. Chapter 14. That night, all the members of the community raised their voices, and they wept aloud. That's how they weep. It's weeping. Got to read it as it says. Verse 2. All the Israelites grumbled against Moses and Aaron and the whole assembly and said to them, if only we had died in Egypt or in this wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us to this land only to let us fall by the sword? In other words, they would rather die than fail. A lot of people are like that. I'd rather just never been born than face tomorrow. That's what they're saying. Why is the Lord bringing us into this land only to let us fall by the sword? Our wives and children will be taken as plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt? They said to each other, we should choose a leader and go back to Egypt. Then Moses and Aaron fell face down in front of the whole assembly gathered there. Joshua son of Nun and Caleb son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had explored the land, tore their clothes, and they said to the entire Israelite assembly, the land we passed through and explored is good, exceedingly so. If the Lord's pleased with us, he'll lead us into the land, a land. And he's saying, just think about it, flowing with milk and honey. And will give it to us, only do not rebel against the Lord. Don't be afraid of the people of the land, because we're going to devour them. Their protection's gone, but the Lord's with us. Do not be afraid of them. That's where we're going to end. Now, you're probably saying, okay, so you just said Caleb, he's a zero? He sure sounds like a hero to me. Historically speaking, yes. When we look back on Caleb, wow, there is a man of courage. But in his own day and age, they hated him. He was a zero. And that's true with most people of faith. Most people who really live for the Lord during their own time are not really wanted around. They're not necessarily special. They're often misunderstood, and it's primarily because they trust God when everybody else wants to trust themselves. When a person believes in God, specifically that he will deliver, the backlash from others who have no faith sometimes is ruthless. So let me just show you. Caleb was the original has-been. First of all, look at verse 10. Verse 10 in chapter 14. I mean, just think about this. But after him and Joshua said, let's take the land, the whole assembly, that's over 2 million people, talked about stoning them. Could you imagine walking everywhere you go, everybody wants to kill you or shut you up or say, will you just be quiet? We don't want you around. You're no good, man. You're going to get us in trouble if you keep talking about this. Wow. People hated him. Loyalty to God makes no sense to the average person. I'll say that again. Loyalty to God in our own day and age makes no sense to the average person. How does your community where you live, or how does even the media treat people who name Jesus? Have you ever gone on Twitter and said something good about Jesus? You'll have all of these people said, oh, so you believe in a fairy tale. You're real smart. It's incredible the vitriol that's out there for those who claim faith. People don't like, and this is really true, people don't like spiritually fervent people around, especially if they're vocal. Will you just shut up about that Jesus stuff? Can you remember when I was a youth pastor, I went to an open house? When I walked into the open house, 3 families who left our church because I confronted one of their children on sin, they turned their back on me. I walked into the open house, they wouldn't even look at me. I went to the deacons, I said, if I'm causing a problem in this community, you can fire me. They said, no, that's one of the jobs of a pastor is to keep the wolves away. But I'll tell you, that's hard. It's hard to take. I know families in this church who have lost friends, other family members, even parents, because they want to live righteous lives and obey the Scriptures. And people are like, what? What's wrong with you? Most people wanted him dead. Second thing is if you think about it, Caleb was forced to endure for 40 years the ramifications of their sinful choices. That's amazing. Look at chapter 14, verse 26. Verse 26 says, the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, how long will this wicked community grumble against me? I have heard the complaints of these grumbling Israelites. So tell them, as long as I live, declares the Lord, I will do to you the very thing I heard you say. In this wilderness, your bodies will fall. Every one of you, 20 years old or more, was counted in the census who has grumbled against me. Not one of you will enter the land, I swore, with uplifted hand to make your home, except for 2 people, Caleb and Joshua. So if there's 2 million people that was in a wilderness, and so for the next 40 years, all of them are going to die, those over the age of 20, do you know how much that comes to? That comes to, somebody said, about 130 people every day for 40 years died. And Caleb had to witness it. So he was in the middle of a community that was reaping the whirlwind of their sinful choices, and he still had to trust God. It's easy to lose hope in a community you live in when it seems like nobody believes in God anymore. When you can't necessarily trust your elected officials, your media, school boards sometimes, and you wonder, what's the point? What's the point of even trying to live godly in a world that could care less? It's hard to be a Christian single in this culture. Really hard. But don't give up hope. Do not give up hope. The reason why you should not give up hope is because despair is Satan's powerful tool to stop you, to cause you to think it's just not worth it. So quit. Why try? Why have hope? The reason you should have hope is because God tells the truth and Satan's a liar. Don't believe him. Well, the third thing we can say about this has-been is when he finally gets his chance, I mean, this guy was old. Really, really old. Like, why? He's got no life left in him. Go to book of Joshua, chapter 14, 6 through 10. Joshua 14. So they enter into the promised land. Everybody 20 and under was able to enter into the promised land, plus Joshua and Caleb. That's it. So then they enter this new land, and they go about the promised land, looking at the land that they are now to take over. In Joshua 14:6, it tells you the story, picks up back with Caleb. It says this, "Now the people of Judah approached Joshua at Gilgal. And Caleb, son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, said to him, 'You know what the Lord said to Moses, the man of God, at Kadesh Barnea about you and me? I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me to Kadesh Barnea to explore the land. And I brought him back a report according to my convictions. But my fellow Israelites who went up with me made the hearts of the people melt in fear. I, however, followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly. So on that day Moses swore to me, the land on which your feet have walked will be your inheritance, and that of your children forever, because you have followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly. Now then, just as the Lord promised, he has kept me alive for 45 years. Wait a minute. 45 years that God promised? Took him 45 years for Caleb? And then he says this, 45 years since the time he said this to Moses, while Israel moved about in the wilderness. So here I am today, 85 years old. Come on. 85 years old. That's retirement time, man. Like way past retirement time. Like almost 20 years past retirement time. He just has enough energy maybe to play cribbage and watch a couple Fox News shows, right? This guy's worthless. 85-year-old men do not fight giants. They don't. His good years are gone like sand through a spaghetti strainer, and it's time for Caleb to let the younger men dream. And what if I saw Caleb? I'd say, Caleb, wake up. You, sir, are an old man, so why don't you sit down? And if he was going to be leading me, look at, he's a has-been. Before a person considers hanging it up, before a person wants to quit, before a person keeps moving by their own opinions, there is one really important truth you have to remember. What God says is what is true. Not what you think, not your opinions, not even your feelings. What God says is reality. Did you know, according to Scripture, God spoke and the earth was created. So what God says is what is, not what you say. We actually live in a world that thinks because I speak something, I can create reality. Even religious people teach that. That's baloney. What God says is. Not me. Especially not me looking in the mirror going, I'm a washed out has-been. Oh. Do you know what God said about Caleb back in Numbers 14? Look at Numbers 14:24. This is what he said 45 years prior. And it came true. The reason it came true is because what God says is true. Numbers 14:24. He says this. My servant Caleb has a different spirit and follows me wholeheartedly. I will bring him into the land he went to, and his descendants will inherit. He says two amazing things. Number one, Caleb's different. He's different. He's not like anybody else. He was not a run-of-the-mill Israelite. He was not a crowd follower. He was not a conformer. He was not a people pleaser. He was not a person who allowed himself to be measured by his opinion or the standards of those around him. He was different. Wow. That's a huge statement. I would also say his difference led him into obedience. He follows me wholeheartedly. What he's saying is what God says, I'm going to believe it, I'm going to do it. That's what made him different. So to understand, just give you a little bit of idea, if you read the common man at that time, what makes him different from the average man? Psalm 78 talks about the heart of the average man. The average Israelite, this is how they viewed the world. They did not believe in God. They did not trust in his deliverance. They kept on sinning. In spite of his wonders, they did not even believe. Do you know what his wonders were? If you read Psalm 78, he details the wonders. He says in Psalm 78:13, he split the Red Sea. Wow, that's incredible. He split the Red Sea where 2 million people walked through. The chariots chased them, and then he covered over the chariots, and the Egyptian army was destroyed. If I saw that, I think I would believe. I think I would. Well, what else did he do? Well, he had this cloud that guided them by day and fire of pillar by night. A gigantic fire pillar for 40 years, every day. I kind of would believe in his presence, I think. And then it says they were real thirsty in the desert, because you get thirsty when you're in the desert. I don't know if you knew that. They wanted some water. And there were no wells. So he goes, why don't you just hit a rock? Just strike the rock. And out of a rock came water. That would kind of be something to help your faith a little bit. And then it said, verse 24 says, when they were real hungry, he sent bread from heaven every day. When they woke up, they'd wake up, they'd rub their eyes, go outside, and across their front lawn, they could pick baskets of honey bread every day. You didn't even need to work your farm back then. Those things should cause you to believe, but he says they kept on sinning in spite of his wonders. Well, what has he done for me? Oh, he only sent his son to die for you and rise again from the dead. It's kind of a cool thing. The core problem with man is this. It's not that they sin primarily because they don't believe he's good. They don't believe his promises. John Piper said, the whole goal of the Christian faith is to believe the promises of God over the promises of sin. But most people get rid of the promises of God and would rather go back to Egypt. Why do people sleep with somebody before marriage? Because he's not going to find somebody that's going to be pure. So, might as well. Because I'm going to do it for myself. I don't trust him. I don't trust he can fulfill my dreams. Humans want certainty. We want clarity. We want security. We want to know. God simply wants you just to trust him in the confusion and in the, what I would say, even lack of evidence to trust. Just trust him. That pleases him. And for those, let's say you do begin to trust him. Let's say life is tough. Let's say you have depression. Let's say even your friends abandon you. What would happen if in your life? What would happen to you if you did decide to trust God? What does God do for people that trust him? Does he do anything for people that trust him? Well, if we go to Joshua 10 through 12, he'll show us. Joshua 10, 14, 10, and 12. Joshua 14, 10 through 12. Joshua writes, now then, just as the Lord promised, he has kept me alive for 40 years since the time he said this to Moses. While Israel moved about in the wilderness, so here I am today, 85 years old. I am still as strong today as the day Moses sent me out. I'm just as vigorous to go out to the battle now as I was then. Now give me this hill country that the Lord promised me that day. You yourself heard then that the Anakites were there and that their cities were large and fortified. But the Lord's helping me. I'll drive them out, just as he said. So what does God do for those who trust him? Two things. He delivers on his promises. I want you to look at verse 10 again. This is really interesting. I can hear some people say this. All right, So you're telling me God delivers on his promises. However, Caleb had to wait 45 years for the promise. I know, but look what he did in the meantime. Because truthfully, you and I live in the meantime. What is the meantime? So I pray for something. I pray for God to answer in a specific way. Then you have a promise. In between my prayer and the promise is the meantime. And it's the meantime where often many of us fail. What did God do for Caleb in the meantime? Verse 10. Now then, just as the Lord promised, he has kept me alive. What does God do for me in the meantime? He keeps me. He keeps me. I think the hardest part of waiting for answered prayer is the meantime. Do I just crawl into a hole and die in the meantime? Do I worry and pout and whine and go, oh, if I was never born, oh, I better just quit? Do I get angry? He's not answering my prayer. What do I do in the meantime? I need to understand something. God promises in the meantime, he's going to keep me. He's going to keep me alive. If I know that he's keeping me while I'm waiting, I then can disregard the anxiety that's plaguing me. Don't let it overwhelm me. John 14 says, let not your hearts be troubled. That's the promise in the meantime. And it's in the meantime that we need his grace the most. And did you know life always happens in the meantime? We're always in the meantime. The problem with people who say they trust God in the meantime is they often forget to notify their face about that. Oh, I want to go back to Egypt. Where is he? Oh, did you see the political situation? Oh, no. You're in the meantime. He'll keep you, won't he? I think so. He will never leave me or forsake me. It's the meantime. I want you to notice something else. Look at Joshua 15:14. It's one teeny little verse. I want you to notice this teeny little verse. It's an amazing little teeny little verse. In context to the whole thing we've read, this little verse is fascinating to me. Verse 14 of chapter 15. From Hebron, that's the city that God gave to Caleb. It's in the name Judah. It's the Judah, kind of by Bethlehem. So from Hebron, Caleb drove out the three Anakites, Shishai, Ahiman, and Talmai, the sons of Anak. That's all it says. Why is that so important? Those are the giants. Those are the sons of the Nephilim. The Nephilim is kind of a weird story in Genesis where the weird angels had basically cohabitated with some humans and had these Nephilim. Massive. Goliath, he's part of the Nephilim. And these three guys, it just simply says, you know what? Caleb shows up and just drives them out. It's kind of like Caleb took his axe and chopped down 3 trees. No big deal. No big deal. These are the guys that the other spy says, we're like grasshoppers, they're going to destroy us. Well, guess what? An 85-year-old man chopped them down. No problem. In the way it is written, it seems like he barely broke a sweat. All of the fear, all of the anxiety, all of the catastrophic talking at camp for the Israelites, and the trauma-inducing levels that spiked were handled in a simple verse. All it says is Caleb drove them out. That's it. And I bring this up because here's my question for you. Because I know me. I preach to me more than anybody. How much time do you spend wringing your hands on your problems and issues thinking they're going to ruin your life? And then when the problem that you worried about for years comes up, it was like handled in no time. Oh, I got a doctor's appointment. You go to the doctor's appointment and said, you're looking good. Oh, I am? Wow. Oh, Or the bills, oh, the bills, I can't pay them, and then they're paid. What? Do I ever thank God when they're paid? Or a child's rebellion, they'll never come back. And then they come back. It's like, God, thanks. Or a pretty girl rejected me. Oh, I'm never wanted. And then when God finally answers, it's usually answered like that. When you finally face those terrifying giants with the help of God, they'll be taken away in mere moments because God destroys them. He loves it. He's strong, even for 85-year-old men. He is. Caleb's life, I'll say this, produces to me one powerful lesson. Faith is everything. Because God loves it when you put your trust in Him, no matter what circumstance, what situation. The giants are more scared of God than you are of the giants. But I think there's another massive lesson we need to see, and this is what I needed to see by that poolside. Age means nothing to God when it comes to fulfilling His will on earth. There is no such thing as a has-been at any age. Like some people think they're has-beens at age 65. Some people think they're has-beens at 25 because I sinned in my teen. Some people think they're has-beens. God can't use me. It's over. I'm washed up. Two very interesting observations I made. God's glory does not diminish because you're growing older. In truth, the closer you get to glory, the more you should want to glorify God. The heart of Caleb in verse 10 of Joshua 14:10. Now then, just as the Lord promised, He's kept me alive for 45 years. So here I am today. I am still as strong today as I was the day Moses sent me out. He doesn't quit. He does not quit. Why do people quit? Well, some people will say, well, we should really encourage young people and get excited when young people catch the vision because they have their whole lives to live for Christ. Yes, that's so true. That's so true. But shouldn't we be equally excited when older people catch a vision because they have their whole eternity to live for Christ? It's a long time. Did any of you watch the Olympic track and field this year? It was amazing. It was amazing. Raise your hand if you did. Track and field. It was fantastic. Casey, I'm proud of you. Way to go. You're gutsy to raise your hand in the crowd. So here's my question based on those who watch track. What kind of runner or relay team is more impressive? The ones who start out fast and quick but lose steam over the last few laps, or those who push extra hard the moment they see the finish line? Did any of you watch the 1500s with the American Cole Hocker? Did you see that? Oh, if you want to go back, go on YouTube and look up Cole Hocker's race. He ran the 1500, which is the new mile. 4 laps, just 4 laps. After the first lap, he was in 9th place. After the second lap, he was in 7th place. After the third lap, he was in 5th place. And then his last lap, he gave everything he had, and he won the gold by 0.2 of a second, and it's an Olympic record. And you watch it, and you're like, oh, that was incredible. Christians should want to run just as hard the closer they get to eternity. But Chris, come on. Many people are simply tired of serving. They're just tired. They put in their time. And then you have those people that work hard. Shouldn't they be able to use their well-earned extra time and money to chase their bucket list? Some people served enough. Isn't it time for them to be served or at least pampered, in soft retirement? And all I can say is this. I was thinking about that. All I can say is this. Don't squander your superpower by chasing your bucket list. What's that mean? Proverbs 16:31. Gray hair is a crown of splendor. It's talking about wisdom. It is attained through years of righteousness. In other words, you have authority with your wisdom. I'm just beginning to realize that the older I get, the more authority I can speak. Earned wisdom speaks. I can say things at the age of 57 I couldn't get away with at 30 years old. I don't know if I get away with them now, but I do feel a little bit, I can see the finish line a lot closer than I did 20 years ago. I'm going to tell you what I think's the truth. We need to tell the truth. So here's what I've decided to do. My sermon's coming up. When I took off, I was reading some books on preaching, and I'm going to start doing this slide. It's called my A slide. It's when I'm going to be saying things I shouldn't say. It's called Audacity. Jesse's like, oh, great. She's going to get the calls. All right, Audacity just means I'm just going to say what I think. Here's my first question. What is with this idea of having bucket lists? I don't understand it. Like, why do we think we have the right to just, this life is about me exploring the world just for myself? What is it with bucket lists? Like, I have a bucket list to go to the Roman Colosseum. So did Paul. But he kind of did it in different terms. He was led there by God. Like, we love to go see places where people risk for those places. What is a bucket list anyway? Simply, it's me telling God what I want to do. James says, I go to places if it's God's will. What is God's will for your life? That's the first question. I think God's will for your life is to glorify Him any way you can. So you're saying we shouldn't retire and go visit places? I'm not saying that. But I am saying, do you want to run the race harder the last couple laps or not? Second thing, I was at this youth meeting when I was a youth pastor. It was fascinating. There's this church that came up, and different churches gave testimonies. This church came up, and they said, we have a really vibrant youth group. Let me tell you about what's going on in our youth group. And so they got up, and they said, we all of a sudden started having this influx of young people. But we had no youth pastor, and we didn't have money to buy a cool youth pastor, young guy that could do it all. And this 83-year-old man said, I'll run the youth group for you. I got time. And they're like, what? You're 83. He goes, well, I'll just fill in until you find somebody. This 83-year-old man started coming, opening up the youth group room, having lessons, meeting with the kids, taking them out, talking to them. Because he was there, more and more people brought their friends to get to meet this guy because they said the wisdom that came off his mouth was incredible. So they asked the young people, they said, but he's not young. They said, we don't care if somebody's young. All we care about is if somebody loves us and tells us the truth. He was there every week, and I wanted to talk to him. And that group blew up. If you just live for God, you won't believe the things you can do. It's incredible. So in conclusion, I want to tell you, I was reading this week about this new theology. It actually came out 2004 by this guy named Wes Seelger, and he said there's two ways to see the world, and he calls it frontier theology, and he's taking it from the Wild West. His analogy is from the Wild West time. He said there are settlers and then there's pioneers. He said the pioneer sees life as a wild adventure, complete with Indians, saloons, and the open amber waves of rolling land. The settler wants a sure and secure life in town where they want brick and mortar buildings where they're just secure and their money's in a bank and there's no problems. Settlers and pioneers, they'll use the same word to describe things, but the definition's completely different. So if you ask a settler, what is the church? They'd say the church is right next to the courthouse. It opens at the right time and it closes at the right time, and we go there at the right time, and it ends at the right time. Well, what is the church to the pioneer? Oh, it's the covered wagon. So wherever it goes, God's with us. We go out and we search for new land. Well, who is God to the settler? Well, he's the mayor who sits in front of the courthouse and on top floor, and he looks at everything and just makes sure everybody's obeying. There's no problem. Well, who's God to the pioneer? He's the trail boss. He wakes us up in the morning. He says, this is where I want you to go today. Let's go. Let's move out. Well, who's Jesus in the settlers' theology? Oh, he's the sheriff. He gets mad at people who get out of line, and he rewards people who are good. Makes some deputies. Barney Fife. You know how it is. Well, who is Jesus to the pioneer? Well, he's the scout who leads the people on the trail and knows the most adventurous route to follow. Well, who's the Holy Spirit to the settler? Well, he's the saloon owner, the piano player, and the bartender all in one. He just makes you feel good. And if you have a problem, you just go in there and talk to the bartender, and he'll give you a little drink to make it feel better. He just wants you to feel good. Well, who's the Holy Spirit to the pioneer? He's the buffalo hunter. He's kind of crazy. He is dangerous. He brings you into places that normal people won't take you. Who's the pastor? Oh, he's the bank president. I like how this guy describes it. The bank president who rules the bank with an iron hand, makes all the decisions, tells the tellers what to do, upholds the image of the bank. The settlers must constantly be reassured of the safety of their values. The bank president watches the books like a hawk. Each day he examines deposits and withdrawal. He just keeps the town going. Well, who is the pastor for the pioneer? He's the cook. He just makes a meal for you, cleans the dishes, so you can go out on the trail. I find Caleb is a pioneer. Most of the other people would rather go back to Egypt where we knew what's going on. I find some people of faith would rather just give me rules, tell me what to do, and I'm done. But the true Christian is like the pioneer. And you're like, come on, is that theology accurate? Really? Have you ever read Psalm 39? Believe it or not, Psalm 39 is what Mark Lindsley told me about right before he died. He'd meditate on this verse. I read it in the NLT. Look at this verse. Hear my prayer, O Lord. Listen to my cries for help. Don't ignore my tears, for I'm your guest. Did you ever go to somebody's house when you're a guest? You don't own anything. You're just there. I'm not in this world because I own anything. I'm his guest, a traveler passing through. As my ancestors were before me. Where are my ancestors, by the way? Well, they're gone. Where's my dad? I haven't seen my dad in a long time. He's just traveling through. Now it's my time. Am I going to act like a settler, or I'm just going to cling to this earth and everything I have, that it's mine? Or am I going to be free and trust God that he'll take care of me, even if I'm getting a little older? I'm your guest, a traveler passing through.